Hi, good morning, everyone. Hello. So, for today's video, our topic will be all about gender studies and queer theories, specifically their influences in, let's say, in our everyday life. So, in the modern world, as we can see, we tend to adapt to different kind of certain things, as well as gender, adapting to different kind of norms, different kind of cultures. It is now an evolving thing. Gender evolves into something, and it's really important to talk about its influences, the very root of how it seeps into the culture of today's world. And with that, without further ado, let's start with the first um, field wherein gender studies and queer theories is influencing. So the first one in line, we have the influence on literary criticism. So gender studies in queer theory transformed literary criticism by changing how scholars would interpret the text, the characters, and authors. So traditional criticism, as we can see, even if as it was defined in class, often ignored issues of gender and sexuality. They would focus mainly on aesthetics and some universal concepts. So, with the use of this gender theory that is now existing, this queer theories that is existing, literary critic, feminism, those who are into analyzation of the books and the pieces, they try to re-examine literary canons. They want to recover the neglected woman writers. As we've heard, there are Jane Austen is now, I think, resurrected from the dead because all of her books is now being the talk of the town, right? So there are feminine writer that are now being called to media because they are in the categorization of their gender, part of this whole spectrum. So I think in the influence of literary criticism, it has been known that the category between just female and male, even the hierarchy of both, are now expanding into different definitions. Female can now adapt a certain qualities that male have in terms of the gender norms, in terms of few newfound definition and terminology that is now used for genders. Let's proceed to, of course, um, what do you call this? When it comes to queer criticism, kasi it just no the very idea of queer criticism is just it expanded the analysis. So the past analysis of all those literary critics still are the same, but it was now they are now much more aware of a certain aspect that they are going to look into. Say, for example, coded representation of sexuality, of queer desire in literature. So those are one among many things. Okay, now let's proceed to the other field we're in. Um, queer and gender studies is influencing. Okay, influence on social media and political movements. So, in this part, I think this is really prevalent because even us do this. You know, the social and political movements on social media. So, accordingly, gender studies in queer theory strongly influence feminist movements, LGBTQ plus activism, and campaigns for equality. These theories provided intellectual foundations for advocating women's rights, reproductive rights, same-sex marriages, gender inclusivity, and anti-discrimination law. So I think with those law being published or being established in the system, I think gender and queer theories has really big impact and influence in these kind of settings, especially how um, the activists were encouraged to question not only the discrimination but also the system that defines what society considers as the normal sexuality. Diba no? The normal sexuality and the normal gender identity, no? Like, we can see pride marches, queer activism, and movement for inclusivity that reflect on the influence of really these theories that are already existing. So that's what I can really say about it. No, I think it's people are now what they call woke. So people uses different kind of perspective, even odd perspective, because I believe that this generation is ah let's not delve into that. Okay, the next influences is influence on education or academia. So what about this? Okay, let's just read it. The emergence of gender studies in queer theory transformed um, universities and academic institutions by establishing gender and sexuality as legitimate fields of inquiry. Other than that, I think the influence of um, gender is how it encouraged interdisciplinary approaches, like in terms of combining the sociology, literature, philosophy, what else, anthropology, psychology, and political science into the pedagogy. But I think that is not yet something that we can see, something that we can feel in terms of being learners, because some of the teachers are having a hard time adapting a lot of curriculum guides. Some of the people are having a hard time accepting existing theories and realities. So, what I'm trying to say is the school is trying to, the school is influenced because there are some existing clubs, there are some existing inter extracurricular activity in the class, in the school, that is promoting something for women, promoting something for those who belong in the gay umbrella community, right? So even though even though it's still not yet very evident in the school, it's not yet something that people experience. I mean, learners experience, because I still don't see representation of different kind of gender in the textbook, right? I do not see even a side character that would represent a particular queer character. So, in terms of um, teaching materials, in terms of stuff, there is not yet an influence, but I can say that gender theories are being sought in the class, in the school. Next theory would be, I mean, next influence will be on pop culture and media. So yeah, um, gender studies in queer theory influence contemporary discussions about, it's not just contemporary. I think even before it has been the talk on the table, but it's not that loud. But now that there's a discussion about the representation of diversity in media, modern films, television programs, and literature increasingly include diverse gender identities in queer characters because of the growing awareness influenced by feminist and queer perspective, according to Salamon in 2021. However, some scholars argued that representation alone does not guarantee equality, because you might be presented, but in terms as you are the butt of the joke, you know what I mean? a lot of queer characters were becoming clowns as a representation, but then not really represented as it is. You know what I mean? So as you can see, this one particularly, the picture that I added here is um, in a film, an indie gay film series in the Philippines, which is entitled Gaya sa Pelikula. So it's a very vulnerable film to watch because you will be immersing into an emotion, particularly to the gay community. Um, we know that it is still not yet a natural thing to be gay, because there's this one post that I actually saw when he says people are becoming so chronically online, gay are becoming so chronically online, that they forgot gay is still not a normal thing. So when I was reflecting about it, influence in media, in the pop culture of today, it is really sad to say that when we are met with, or we encounter some certain aspect that we avoid, it's really vulnerable. Say for example, when the influence of gay culture, the influence of queer theory starts to seep into films, and then you watch a particular film that is very deeply influenced by these theories, like this one, Gaya sa Pelikula, like in movies, Gaya sa Pelikula, you will be met with a particular emotion that you've been avoiding for a very long time because you're afraid to face it. And now, because of these films, because of this pop culture media representation, you are facing the emotions you were hiding for a very long time. And it's very vulnerable when it gets to the point that you face it and you don't skip it. People today were on their screens 24/7. I think that the influence is really, really. Ay, walang signal. Sorry. Sorry. Okay. I think that's all. I think that in terms of the influences in pop culture, in the literary criticism, in the field of education, in the field of political movement, I think that um, the talk about gender finally rises itself. Okay, let's proceed to the issues of gender studies in queer theory. Okay, now let's proceed to the issues. The first issue is controversy in film and media representation. So I think one of the issue, as it says here, a major issue surrounding gender studies in queer theory is the growing influence on films, as I've said earlier, in television, in literature, and digital media. These theories challenge traditional portrayals of masculinity, femininity, and sexuality, which often creates public debate and resistance from audience who believe that media is becoming overly politicized. So yeah, that's one of the issue. But on the other side, queer theorists would want to argue that um, even history speaks that mainstream media is historically centered on heterosexuality as a default norm, right? While portraying queer qualities or identities as deviant, comedic, what else? Tragic or invisible, right? Because of this, of course, gender studies in queer theory encourage a broader representation of the umbrella community in the non-traditional gender identities that are still not accepted. So, modern films, television series might sometimes, well, it's also an issue because of the very influence that it has done, the surrounding idea that now gender is a thing. um Sometimes television prioritizes representation and political messaging rather than quality in storytelling, I guess. Yeah, that's one of the issue. Some audiences believe that, I'm not gonna say some, I think there are few of them na lang, that believe that media industry. I think I have one of the takes before, wherein I believe that media industry intentionally insert LGBTQ plus themes in and even feminist perspective merely just to appear progressive or socially aware. This criticism became especially visible in discussions surrounding Hollywood films, streaming series, and global entertainment. I can see a lot of BL series that are for gay baiting, queer baiting. Yeah, that's one of the um I think the issue. This issue really demonstrates it. Okay, let's proceed to the next issue. Public misunderstanding and misrepresentation. This one, so particularly this one, another major issue. Uh, Many people incorrectly assume that these theories aim to erase biological sex, reject all forms of traditions, or promote particular sexual identities rather than critically analyzing systems of power and identity. So when people are surprised about a certain culture, a new culture that is finally becoming a thing, of course people would think, are you removing the last one? Are you trying to deconstruct something that was already a routine? Diba? The only thing that gender studies is trying to do is to examine, no, kaninyo, no, the major thing, I mean, the only thing that gender studies is trying to do is to examine how society construct gender roles. Again, I'm gonna repeat it. Gender study, the only thing they want to do is examine how societies construct gender roles, not um, not imposed. They want to examine and then they want to tell how it is, not to impose expectations, inequalities. They want to see them. They want to see what are the inequalities in genders, what are the expectation in genders. Mm, that's for the gender studies. For queer studies, critics, uh, there are some rigid categories as we know it, and that is surrounding sexuality and identity. And however, because these theories question the long-standing norm, often interpreted as an attack against the religion, the morality, or traditional family structures, because you're trying to ruin something that is already embedded in people's mind, in people's schema. So I think that is the public misunderstanding or misinterpretation that every time, I think not only on gender theory or queer theory, as well as in all other evolving culture, all other born cultures, okay, where being seen as something new, something strange, the defamiliarization is there, right? Now let's proceed to the uh, conflict with traditional and religious beliefs. So I think this is a very obvious part, the conflict with traditional and religious beliefs. So gender studies in queer theory often come into conflict with traditional culture and religious belief because They question fixed understanding of gender, sexuality, and of what is it? Oh my god, I can't. Why can't I even read? And family structures. Many religious traditions emphasize binary gender roles in heterosexual relationship as natural, moral, or divinely established. So, ang kwan magod, ang this is becoming a conflict. It is because queer theory wanted to challenge the assumptions of religious concept, no, by arguing that gender identities and sexual norms, unsa siya, unsa, are socially shaped rather than biologically predetermined or a universal fixed thing, right? So gusto niya gina-challenge niya na dili sila predetermined, which is the belief of the religions, right? Michael Foucault, one of the proponents among research, no, yang gina-argue that society produce ideas about sexuality through discourse. I mean, well, I think it is the only place na makadiscuss sila about ana in discourse institution, in literary circle, what academic circle, no? The system of power that are seeping through what is called as the objective truth. Am I making sense? Kuha naman good because of this gender studies who's trying to challenge. We have conservative people, religious group sometimes perceive gender questioning system that marginalize, I mean, gender studies and queer theory as something that undermining the traditional morality, as if there is advanced morality, modern morality, diba? Family systems and social order were questions. It's not really questions. It's just trying to examine, right? Now, the issue just becomes very visible in debates, especially pag mag-talk na about same-sex marriages, transgender rights, what else? Gender inclusive education, sa pa pronoun usage, in LGBTQ representation in schools and media. I think on that part, religion will gonna stomp on the road and gonna block you walking, no? Um, yeah. So let's proceed to commercialization in tokenism in media. So with this one, um, can you see it? I cannot see it. Ah, there. Okay. So another issue connected to gender studies and queer theory is the commercialization of identity within popular culture and the entertainment industry. You know, as discussions and as rumors or talks of the internet that diversity and inclusivity kay kuha na daw na becoming more influential. Corporations and media companies are increasingly incorporating LGBT representation in terms of their advertisements, television programs, no, para atong um, Destiny Rose, right? We also have the Colgate advertisement. Pag muagi ka sa dalan, mag-kiss tong murag duha ka bug nanindot kayo smile, no? We can visibly, I mean, the increase of visibility of gender theory on media becomes in companies, no, becomes a representation that is pointing at for the woke people, that is pointing at as a marketing strategy rather than ano ba, rather than something that commits to inclusivity. Dili na siya yung ato, di na siya something for inclusivity and equality. It's more of like a marketing strategy. Kay the more man kang nga visible na mga yung anak karon, nga the more nga gina-force ang idea of a particular norm, of particular culture, the more pa siya nga murag nahimo na lang siyang superficial. Dili na siya genuine, right? Muna siya ang nahulog na tokenism in media. Indot ka siya nga buhatan o research study, commercialization in tokenism in media, no? Okay. So, for example, ano yung sa film sa LGBTQ. So, characters have a very limited rule or stereotypical rules or portrayals that contribute little to the narrative itself. So, kana bitaw i-insert jud ang bite mis kang dili siya mahulog sa script, dili siya mahulog sa narrative or sa structure sa story, no? Mo na mo argue na dayon ang karong mga queer theories na kani siya nga representation is um murag gi-reduce nimong identity into something that is marketable. Si tawag na marketable trends mo ba ni tawag na rather than a meaningful challenging system of inequality and exclusion, 'di ba? Um manginga na ba? Yes. Okay, let's proceed to the um next o Western centered perspective and cultural limitation. Kani isa pud ni siya sa mga nakitaan bitaw nato pod na another issue of gender studies in queer theory is that many foundational theory emerge from Western academic context and may not fully represent non-Western cultures and experiences. Una kasagara mo ingon tanga na westernized naman ka, especially if you are so liberal. That's what people would tag you. Westernized na ka, imong culture, liberalized na kay ka, no? From the standpoint kasi sa scholars for the post-colonial perspective, to argue that these kind of ideas about gender, about sexuality, identity vary greatly across different kind of countries, different kind of continents. No concepts that develop within Western, like say for example Western feminism or well, okay, queer theory may not always align with the indigenous traditions that is here in the Philippines. Did you get me? Diba? Dili siya Asian culture kasi Asian cultural perspective or non-Western understanding of identity will really oppose kasi hindi yun ang nakasanayan eh. That's not sig tawag na for old time's sake, yung ginatawag nila for old time's sake, hindi ganyan yung kultura namin, no? Tungod po ani nga kritisismo, um kuan siya kanang gina-advocate na dayon siyang si taganay gin, gina-advocate na siya nga nadji nagkalain-lain nga representation sa gender studies and queer theory, like there will be regional differences. Ang Mindanao lahi sa perception sa mga bayot o ang something like that, like in northern part of the world lahi sila kuan kanang basta those who we cannot rely solely on Western perspective with regard to these things. So that's an issue. Dili tanan maka-adapt. It is because the living community of that particular place is not the same to that community that establishes that particular theory. Period. Okay. So, oh, so yeah, I think that that will be all. So, in a nutshell, um, gender really is an evolving thing, and it's still halfway into people's heart because it's not yet still accepted. Even people who pretend that they already accepted the norm, they already accepted the culture, it is still not a thing. It is still um, something, especially that we are living here in a Christian country. So there are also countries that already uh, banned sexuality that does not conform to the traditions. Like if you are gay, you will be hanged. I forget what country it is, but I think it is existing. There will also other countries who um, sanction you, gives you penalty if you do not act accordingly to what is the norm, to what is traditional. So the influences of queer and gender study in the question of, is it already enough? Is it seeping throughout the world? That is still a question. You see in the recent news, a mayor of a particular city somewhere in another country is openly gay, kissing his husband, and the same day he wins the election. That thing. So why am I talking about this stuff? It is because gender studies and queer theories, you might say that it's not only talking about gay people, it's not talking about lesbians, it's talking about particular new norms that we are adapting. It's particularly talking about feminism, it's talking about masculine and how there will be new definitions of what it is that we are going to adapt someday in the near future. That's the gender studies. Try to re-examine again and again and again the moment people start conforming to something else. I know that's what you think about the gender studies, but I think there's a call of concern when it comes to both addressing the umbrella community of gays, of queer, of non-conforming genders, not just male and female, feminine and masculine. I think there really is should be a talk about certain aspect that would address negatively or positively with regards to what is happening with the gendering of the world. Thank you. I think that's all. See you next meeting. Goodbye.